Children go to school. In most cases, they follow the same program. Some kids get along just fine, others get stuck. So there are many individual differences. But can it only be explained by IQ differences? The answer is no. In recent years, neuroscientists have learned a lot about brain development. The most important discovery is that the brain matures in different stages during our lifetime. The question is whether our education is tuned enough to this. Are children learning the right skills at the right time? And what happens when you bother a slow brain with things it isn't ready for yet? I'm addressing all these and more questions in this video. I'm a healthcare psychologist and therapist, and I make videos on psychology and mental health topics. So, what are the new insights about brain development? Some brain structures are already well developed at birth, while other areas fully develop around the 5th, 8th, 15th or even after the 20th year of life. This brain maturation follows more or less the same pattern in everyone, but that does not alter the fact that there are a large individual differences. There are children who are good with numbers from an early age, but it does not necessarily mean they are math geniuses. In any case, it means an early onset of development, but everything still can change. Some brains develop fast in the first place, but stagnate later, and other brains start slowly and later make a big leap. Research suggests that most human brains take about 25 years to develop. Each brain develops at its own pace, but children at school are forced to adapt to a tightly composed education program. But a brain that is not yet ready for certain skills should not be pushed. This can cause a problem. If you bother children whose brains are not yet ready for abstract reasoning and logic, you run the risk of math anxiety. They may spend the rest of their lives thinking they can count. But many late bloomers are really good at math, but they need a bit more time. The age-related tests, which are based on average, are disadvantageous for late bloomers. As a result, they are often underestimated. The reverse happens too. Children who perform well at school at a young age can later stagnate in their development. But going up in a school career is much harder than taking a step back. The female and male brains are almost identical. The boys' brains, however, have some differences. The centers responsible for action and movement are slightly more active from infancy. That makes sense because the boy's body develops more muscles and a heavier skeleton. Little boy's brain makes him move more. As a result, they are often more physically active than girls. They are climbing, jumping, and running. This is great for developing coordination and complex movements and therefore also for muscle building and skeletal growth. Therefore, it is not wrong that boys are also very explorative and do not pay too much attention to what could happen. As a result, boys are more likely to be considered busier than girls. But that's good and functional. It is an important stage in the development. And what about girls? Their brains are usually less focused on action and exploring, and they also don't have such a strong movement-oriented brain program. However, little girls are a bit ahead in language development. Their brain centrums focus more on social interaction and social learning rather than boys. But if we mainly stimulate a child on what he or she is good at from a young age, a child will develop better in this area and we get a self-fulfilling prophecy. In other words, our expectation will come true simply because we believe or anticipate it will. But children should be encouraged, regardless of gender, from an early age to be explorative as well as to develop their language and social skills. In many schools, children do not learn a foreign language until later, around the age of 10. But if you look at how the brain develops, that's not good timing. Brain cannot develop on its own. It needs stimuli from the environment. There is a strict, sensitive period for language learning. Those who are not fed with linguistic stimuli before the age of 6 will never again to be able to speak any language fluently. In general, before puberty, you can learn to speak a foreign language relatively effortless. After that, the brain gets more and more difficult to learn a new language. There are still few schools that make smart use of the brain's natural ability to easily learn other languages at a young age. Under the influence of brain maturation and sex hormones, children reach puberty in secondary school. The frontal lobe, the area responsible for logical reasoning, decision-making, and resisting impulses, matures gradually, and this maturation is not finished by puberty. In the meantime, however, the emotional brain does get a big boost under the influence of hormones. As a result, the ratio versus emotion in teenagers is often out of balance. At some moments, the frontal lobe dominates. They may seem very mature, but sometimes the emotional brain takes control. Until the cortex has matured and the emotional brain makes its contribution to information processing in a more controlled way, we cannot expect young people to be able to optimally plan their studies themselves and make important choices about the future. In some cases, the brain doesn't fully mature until age 25. Adolescents can easily decide which clothes they want to wear or not. But making a decision is different from making responsible choices and assessing the possible consequences. So for many to make their own study plan and to choose what to study is too much to ask before their 20s. Young people, therefore, still need guidance. I am talking not only about guidance on the what I want to be later question. The guidance is needed also with something as simple as planning a test week properly or school leisure time planning. The message is to postpone important future decisions. The more mature the brain, the more solid the choices. Another factor is that when choosing their future profile, girls are often pushed in one direction by their language skills, because why should they do math and chemistry if languages are easy for them? But in Finland, for example, students choose a specialization later than in many other countries. It appears that more girls choose mathematics and technology studies. But if we look at Dutch universities and colleges, nearly a third of first-year students change their education after a year. So even the somewhat older student brain is still fickle. Children often have consecutive classes that appeal to the same brain regions. Those brain areas can become exhausted. As a result, the brain absorbs less information. 2 foreign languages in a row is not a very good idea from the brain's functioning perspective. because overload and overstimulation of the brain is not good, but underload can also have a negative effect. The best is to alternately plan classes in the school schedule that offer the brain sufficient new information. The brains of children and young people are pre-programmed to function this way. Old-fashioned stomping isn't always bad. You often have to repeat some knowledge to remember it better. You can compare it with sports. You can become better through a lot of practice and not so much through insight. Another way to keep the brain fit is physical exercise. During gym, the heart pumps more blood through parts of the body, including the brain. And more blood means more oxygen, which is very important for brain functioning. In addition, there are many networks in the brain that are used for making complex movements as well as for language and math. But not only physical exercise determines whether the brain receives enough oxygen. Scandinavian scientists found that there is a connection between school performance and school building ventilation. Children perform poorly with higher CO2 and low oxygen concentration in the classroom. Other climatic conditions have an influence as well. For example, Norwegian researchers discovered that boys have trouble concentrating and girls become restless due to high temperature of the environment and too little daylight. Therefore, it's important that children get enough breaks and can spend some time outside between classes. That's all for today. If you learned something new from this video, I would love for you to support me with a thumbs up. And don't forget to subscribe and to turn on the notification bell and to share this video with your friends. Thank you for staying with me. See you next time.